So thanks for Chris for coming. Chris Lione, we're so happy to have you here tonight. And again, I really appreciate you taking your time out to speak with us. Faculty are here, students are here, some community people are here. So thank you so much. So I thought we could just kind of jump in.
Sure, and thank you for having me.
Oh, sure. So kind of maybe start to give some background. So could you give us some context in which ACT UP came into being and how you became involved?
Well, it started with the Silence Equals Death project, which was our name later that we had to come up to, because I'm going to tell this a little bit in reverse. Most people think that it was designed by a group that was part of ACT UP. It actually predated ACT UP by a few weeks before it was first seen in public. I was part of a group of 6 men. We had no name. We kept ourselves pretty much based using the model of women's consciousness raising groups of the 60s and 70s, where, you know, it was the height of the AIDS crisis, and we wanted to just get together, but it didn't. You know, at one point you asked me if it, oh, I lost my thought. I'm sorry. Anyway, so it was one of the nights that we would meet on Monday nights, and it would be potluck, and we talk about, you know, being queer and lonely and, you know, not having boyfriends. And we always ended up talking about politics. That inevitably was what we ended up talking about. And our intention was never to make anything or do anything public. This was just the 6 of us. And it started with Abram and Charles coming up with the idea that they would like to get a tiny group together, and they invited Jorge, and then 3 of them each brought somebody in. And that's how Brian, Oliver, and I came into the picture. So anyway, one Monday night, Abram said that Nora Ephron, the novelist, was going to not be showing up for a talk that she had committed herself to at the Gay and Lesbian Center, and that Larry Kramer was going to step in for her. So he suggested that following Monday, instead of doing our regular thing, that we go to hear what Larry had to say. And so we did. And that was a very amazing evening that's been written about and talked about and probably end up being in a movie. And Larry's intention, I don't think, well, I don't know. It was always hard to figure out what Larry was thinking, but since he was there just to talk about activism and how poorly how poorly the situation was and how disappointed he was in AIDS activism, Larry had a way of being very insulting. He got the crowd pretty riled up and very excited. And he said, you know, people said, well, we should start something, blah, blah, blah. And Larry said, if that's what you want, come next Monday and we'll talk about it. So we went the following Monday, and by then the poster was up. And it might have been the night ACT UP was born, which would have been the second Monday, or the following, that somebody actually mentioned, you know, did anyone see this poster, which just showed up. And there were over 2,000 of them posts we pasted all over New York City. And the thing about wheat pasting in New York is that it's done by a little mafia of kids, young kids, and you pay them a certain amount of money per poster and they guard it for 2 weeks. And then somebody else comes and pastes right over, or they do. So our intention was to make our own personal statement, in the hopes that people would pay attention to it. But it really was ACT UP, I have to say. They made it famous. We didn't. Um, it got a standing ovation. We were relieved because we used the death word in a time when people were trying to think in the context of AIDS, of safe sex, and the possibility of intimacy. So this is a very early time um, in the pandemic, epidemic, and which would then become a pandemic. And anyway.
I think that was really eye-opening when I read Abram's book, because I was under the impression that it was members of ACT UP that created the poster, and so that kind of backtracking was real. I think is really important.
Yeah, it's not that it's frustrating to us. It's just that over the last 35 years, it's become so worldwide and known that not to sound pompous, we're proud of our work. It wasn't our intention. We were anonymous. We didn't have a name. We didn't copyright it. But it's now pretty clear whenever you Google any historical or especially any academic piece written about ACT UP and Silence Equals Death, it's very clear, and that Grand Fury did not design it. It's understandable that that one would think that. It all happened within a couple of weeks, and we pretty much disbanded and became ACT UP members. We found something differently fulfilling than what we originally did. I mean, we would meet as friends, but our regular designated Monday night meetings, we stopped going to, and we joined various committees at ACT UP as they developed, and the rest is history.
We're going to tease out some of that history today. So, so the book that I was mentioning, and so in Abram Finkelstein's book, After Silence, History of AIDS Through Its Images, he heartbreakingly describes the death of his partner, Don, and how his political activism changed as a result. This was also the time where you and he became friends. Did you have a moment or event which projected you into the path that would lead to ACT UP, and then the creation of the Silence Equals Death poster? Again, kind of going back to the beginnings.
Well, I guess it starts with, Don, who was my brother's best friend. They both worked as salesmen at Macy's while they were going to school. And so we knew Don a long time before not a long time, in those days it seemed a long time, before we met Abram, who Don started dating. We were living on St. Mark's Place. And so the three of them initially, I would say, were, the friends. I was friends with Don, and Abram came later. And it's, we just, how am I trying to phrase this? I guess I came into the friendship as a group a little later into it. And, but it wasn't until Don was diagnosed with AIDS that Abram and I really kind of bonded outside of Peter and Don. I guess Abram and I have had we have an understanding of each other that goes back to those days. And so, it was hard. Abram needed a place to go to, meaning, a friendship to go that had nothing to do with his work or Don's music. Don was a very talented musician. And it wasn't until after Don died that Peter and I had invited Abram to move in with us. It was right before Christmas. And after the night that Don died, well, the morning that Don died, we had asked Abram to move in with us because he was completely alone. And the situation with Don's family and Abram was not good. They were very, very supportive of their gay son. And he was the favorite kid in the family amongst his siblings. They just somehow didn't want to share ownership of their son with anyone. And, it just brought Abram and I closer and closer and closer as friends. So I don't know if I really answered your question.
It seems that Don's death was a catalyst for several of you in terms of thinking about activism, thinking about, or even awareness maybe. If I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems that was kind of a moment for at least you and Abram to kind of maybe think about things. I know it was for him based on what I read, but is that accurate?
Well, it's actually not.
Okay.
In our own way, all of us have, we were children of the civil rights movement, of feminism, or, as gay men, young boys, of course, we were closeted in our early youth. Oh, did I mention the civil rights movement? So we all had our own little political, well, just varying degrees, our own history with activism. Mostly for me was before I was 17, it had to do with Vietnam. I came out in New York I moved to New York when I was 17 and went to school and came out immediately, as did my brother Peter, which I didn't fully understand that he was gay as well. Abram similarly went to the school, I think it's School of the Arts in Boston, the famous art college. And he was out and very political, especially with trans rights. In those days, people said transvestite, and was friendly with, and like, I mean, Abram will frequently say in a charming way that he was raised by transvestites. And other really interesting people were in his class, like Nan Goldman and the photographer Armstrong. I can't remember his first name now. But anyway, Charles's mother was a staunch lesbian feminist. He learned that his mom was a lesbian by reading the New York Times because she was part of a panel with people like Bella Abzug and Gloria Steinem. And Brian, I don't know a lot about his early years and his interest in politics, but by the time I met him in our group, it was clear that this being political wasn't something new for him. And that was really sort of the way it was for all of us. We had our backgrounds, and all of us were, before the AIDS epidemic, we were gay and lesbian activists who, attended, it wasn't as formal as ACT UP, but, attended rallies and we were very out in our jobs and our work and amongst our friends and family.
Well, great. That kind of lays out the group, the original group, a little bit for everybody. So I think that helps kind of understand where we're coming from and how all of this came to be. I know that Abram talks about in his book how he grew up, his family was very active, and so he was kind of raised in that atmosphere of activism. So that it's kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
yeah.
His mom and dad were both major lefties. He jokingly says he was a red diaper baby.
It's funny how red means something different now.
Yes, well, you can fill in the blanks on
Yeah,
that.
right. We won't go there today. So, as you guys are meeting early on, can you describe these early meetings that you started to a little bit about how, they were friends getting together and potlucks and so on. And so how then, these very informal kind of groups or meetings, how did this wonderful idea of silence equals death, a poster, that seems like a big jump from just kind of talking about stuff to then creating what will be this iconic image.
Mhm. No, it's the question. Like I said, two people became three people, and then those three people decided they would limit it to six, and there would be no more people to join, no more. And it was just men. And we, like I said, we talked about we'd always start talking about what's going on and with our lives, our personal lives, or lack thereof. It inevitably ended up political because some horror thing was being printed in the papers all over the country, and the president's refusal to acknowledge the existence of AIDS. President Reagan, he was until the very end of his administration, he would not allow the word to be spoken in front of him. And so as the months went on and we continued meeting in each other's apartment and talking about this stuff, our anger was really growing. It was sort of reaching a boiling point. And since five of us were art directors and Brian was a very successful photo editor, our thinking was very visual. Even though Jorge is a very talented writer and Abe has proven to be a very good writer, we still were in thinking in terms of the visual. And I don't remember which of us said, we need to do something. We need to use our creativity and do something, just even for ourselves. And it was Avram who said, we should just design a poster. And we immediately all loved the idea. It was something we related to. And all six of us, the medium of making a poster. And so we started bouncing ideas around. Well, this was about the time that William Buckley had made this really horrible statement on television. He was a ultra right wing talk show host. I remember him as a child, and he was still very active. I don't remember when he died. I guess he died in the 90s. And he had said that his suggestion to control AIDS was to tattoo HIV positive on the buttocks of anyone who tested positive. It just harkens immediately to Nazi Germany. And that was our first jumping point. That's what we thought of first. Like, how do we address this disgusting comment, this horrible fascist idea of identifying people with HIV? And so, we talked about naturally what our first idea came to be was a photograph of a butt. But then the thing is, how do you take a photograph of a butt that has a fake HIV positive tattoo on it, and it's all genders, it's all colors, it's everyone. How do you represent everyone? And at the time, the press was really focused on gay men. you know, women with AIDS was hardly talked about. I feel that ACT UP was very responsible for getting women into the early trials. The women of ACT UP fought with the CDC and Fauci over this relentlessly. And then women were. And the reason women weren't, I'm digressing now, is because the medical establishment believed women's cycle to possibly affect the test results. Anyway, sexism loomed everywhere. So, you know, we'd even discussed photographers that we thought would be good to do this. And the bottom line is we couldn't do it all in one picture. You know, we would have to find some way of it being both white and black and, you know, both male and female. And it just wouldn't have made a good graphic. You know, it was, we just bagged it. And I had, in the meantime, I had visited Germany, which I used to do a lot in the 70s and 80s. I have friends there. And I'd gone to Dachau, which is was the infamous camp, death camp outside of Munich. That was actually the only one that the International Red Cross could visit. So no one was gassed there. People, at least in the beginning, when the International Red Cross could come to Germany and inspect the camps. And they had an incredible museum. And there's almost no buildings left. There's just the famous gate, of which all of them had the Arbeit macht frei. And, but the museum was fascinating. And they exhibited how they would identify various people, depending on who they were, why they were in the camps, because it was not just Jews. So Jews wore a triangle, two triangles, overlapping triangles that made a Star of David, and it was yellow. I'm sure everyone's seen it. Hopefully you've seen it. And they wore it even before, when they were, before the Jews were rounded up and sent to the camps. If you were a gay man, they would, and you were arrested and put into a camp, your star, if you were gay and Jewish, your star was a pink triangle and a yellow triangle. If you were just gay, it would be pink. The Nazis did not accept the existence of lesbians. They wore red ones, red triangles. That's either they were political, anti-Nazi, or they were antisocial. So anyway, in my dyslexic mind, I remembered the triangle being, the pink part of the triangle being pointing upward like a pyramid. And when I got home and we started talking about this and the idea of using the pink triangle, which is not new to gay and lesbian activism. I remember it in the late 60s, people wore pink triangles. Mostly not even knowing that it came from the Nazis. And Oliver's job was to research that. And we didn't have Google in those days, and that sort of fell through the cracks. And so I got it wrong, and we printed it upside down. It wasn't for a while that somebody pointed that out. Ava was being interviewed, and by, I think it was Michael Signorelli, but I think he was at The Voice at the time. And Avram was so quick, just said, oh, that was deliberate. We wanted it to be positive, that there would look like it was a sign of strength by pointing upward, or something to that effect. And we didn't really come out publicly about that it was actually a mistake and my mistake that we ended up with the triangle pointing upward. Um, I mean, I could talk about how we went the process of actually making it.
Well, it was interesting. In Abram's book, he talks quite a bit about that and the conversations going back and forth about the text, what it should say, the background, even the paper that you were going to print on, the size of it, all of these specifications. And I'm thinking as I'm reading this, these are designers. Yeah, they are art directors and designers.
I
These
thought I
art
had mentioned that in the book, but I read it such a long time ago. I should reread it myself.
Yeah, I mean, living with a designer, I understand
Yeah.
the thought process here.
Imagine being in a room with watching 6 gay men who are all designers and members of the taste mafia, wanting to come up with a single image.
It's amazing. I mean, the fact that it actually exists, right?
It is, it is. And there was lots of, I wouldn't say anger, but there was definitely, you know, strong discussion about where we should focus our message. What would our message be? I think I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't, that, you know, well, let me backtrack a little bit. Oliver threw out the line, silence is death. And we all kind of thought that was pretty brilliant, but it wasn't there yet. And it took time to realize that it really should say equal, but not say it, it should be the symbol. Because as designers, just the word silence is death is too vague and it's not graphically as attractive. So instead of making a headline, we made a logo, which is something that came naturally to us. And then there was the question of the position of the triangle and the size of the triangle. And, you know, one meeting, I had brought a bunch of art supplies and colored paper and scissors and glue and, you know, and vellum pads. And at Jorge's, we just sat down and started drawing. You know, now we had an idea. It was let's put it on paper, and it was fun. I mean, like we were like just looking at each other's pads and cutting things out, and we finally came to realize that graphically, well, here was the argument. The first argument was that if we use a small triangle, it will not be very visible. My argument was that if they were going to be wheat pasted 20 and 30 together on, you know, right against each other, that it would make a really powerful pattern. And so we played around with the sizes, and then we did come to agree that we were going to do it really small and be the and then let the words, you know, be the first thing that, well, I guess, I don't know what people saw first, but the words were rather bold and, you know, they fill the space very nicely. If you look at the original poster, from the top of the word silence equals death, the pink triangle is surrounded in a perfect square. So we actually don't, our poster was not the normal size or the average size when you would have a poster printed. Subsequent versions of the poster, when we gave it to Act Up and gave them the copyright, well, we gave them the rights and ownership to it, they reprinted it and the proportions were different. And, you know, we had, you know, our being fussy about the graphic, we had given that away. You know, we were delighted that they wanted it. They made t-shirts. It funded many actions. I think it still does. selling posters and t-shirts and buttons. And, but anyway, back to the design. I talk in circles. You have to all forgive me.
It's great. No,
It, I think that's really the most important thing, is that we did make a logo out of a very important message, just the way a bank would, or, you know, a department store, something, it's it grabs you, you know. The typeface was a suggestion. It could have been Charles, it could have been Oliver, I don't remember, but it was so right. It letter spaced so beautifully. And, you know, it just, after so much discussion, it suddenly congealed into something that we were ready to make a mechanical. In those days, before computers, we did things on where you would glue stuff onto paper, and then the printer would, you'd indicate the color and the printer would then reproduce it. And I can't find the mechanical. I know I have it somewhere, but it really belongs to the Her Story archive or somebody. But anyway, so
Chris, can I speak to what you're talking about? Because there's a quote in Abram's book that I think sums up what you're talking about beautifully. As you guys were talking, you kind of came to the conclusion that the poster should sell activism in an apolitical moment, be cool and in tone knowing. It needed to be both rarefied and vernacular at the same time. It needed to give the impression of ubiquity and to create its own literacy. It needed to insinuate itself into being. It needed to be advertising. I love that quote because I
well,
think,
that's pure Abram. I mean, he's so smart about this stuff.
but I think that really talks about what you're saying and the result. This poster, you know, people look at it and it's a very simple design, but to get to that point, as you're talking about, it took a lot of thought. It took a lot of planning, replanning, redoing, drawing, talking, all of this,
Yeah.
because it's dense in what it's trying to do. But I think it achieves that.
I think it's the same process. Well, I know it's the same process of when you look at something like a logo for a bank, and they tend to be very simple. The old Citibank logo was brilliant. It was just this oval, blue oval with a four-pointed like star shape in it. They sadly changed it, but that's why people make huge amounts of money to come up with the simplest things. You know, I mean, when I was growing up, the average price for growing up in the 70s, an art director or designer could easily make $100,000 or $200,000 for something that was as simple as a pink triangle on a black ground, if it sent the message, if it worked for the client.
Yeah.
And so we were both the client and the designers. And I would say it's one of the highlights of my design career, not so much because of its fame, but because I love working collectively. And we all love each other. I know it sounds corny, but Oliver passed away quite a long time ago. It's the only one of us who actually died of AIDS, which statistically seems kind of shocking to me. It's amazing any of us are alive, but just working as a collective. And that was at least my personal approach to being a magazine designer, that I didn't just hand over a sketch to an assistant. We worked it together. And it's not fine art. Graphic design is graphic design, you know, and it can become fine art when you think of somebody like Milton Glaser or something. But my approach, and I think our approach, was we were doing this as one, and it truly, truly became as one. there's no one person that can say, well, even though I've said like so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that, it was all about working as a collective. And interestingly enough, for some reason, our name, for what it is, project became collective. And I don't know how that happened. I don't really care. Um, like I said, we pretty soon after ACT UP was born, um, you know, just started going to the ACT UP meetings.
I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about then that transition and how ACT UP started to use the poster, and then I guess how it was. I'm going to use the word manipulated, but not in a negative sense, to different situations. So, for instance, Let the Record Show was a window exhibition at the New
Yes.
Museum that opened in November of 1987. And this was a pivotal moment for ACT UP. Can you talk about the exhibition and how the Silence Equals Death poster was utilized? And you actually sent me an image of the window.
Yeah. They had turned it, first of all, the only member of the Silence Equals Death project who joined the newly formed Grand Fury, who has done lots and lots of fabulous work, including the Read My Lips. I mean, their work is astounding. And so Grand Fury worked with the New Museum. They gave Grand Fury the windows, and they were complex. They addressed a lot of different issues, attacking our political leaders, their ignorance and intolerance of people with AIDS. I have no idea who said they want to make I do remember somebody asking, it's probably Abram saying, would anyone mind if they turned it into a neon? And it was beautiful. It was gorgeous to see it as a neon. And we were delighted, after like I said, we had given up ownership. It was a decision to let it go and just see where it goes. And maybe it would go nowhere. But by the time that the new museum windows opened and the museum opened, that was their first exhibition. The logo, Silence Equals Death logo, was pretty well known, and it had been in a million demonstrations. And it's always, if you just Google, ACT UP, and you'll see it repeatedly amongst the other signage that people made.
Again, this was kind of a very interesting moment for me when I was reading about it, because I'm saying director, the director of the museum basically gave carte blanche to the whole project. And, I know you guys were asking you to say, well, what can we do this? Can we do things outside? Can we use the street? Can we do outdoor projects or, post things? And he was like, sure, yeah, sure.
They were apparently, I mean, I had a full-time job. I couldn't get involved at all, but Abe and I would talk about it, and it was, as I remember, it was a really fulfilling experience for all the men and women that worked on that window or series of windows. Unfortunately, parts of it are missing. There were gravestones poured out of concrete with various names of people who died of AIDS, and I believe also politicians as well, but I'm not sure. I would have to do a little research. And it's very complex. And I think the new museum still has the neon sign. That I think survived.
Nice. So again, we're kind of moving into then the legacy of Silence Equals Death, and then kind of other things that came out of that. So I wanted to ask about the second poster that was conceived, which was AIDS Gate, and
Mhm.
how difficult was it to follow the success of the first poster, and what challenges did your group face?
Uh,
How
it's,
can you top this, right?
well, it's funny. It was, it was so much easier because we had established a look. Again, we're designers, we had established a look that we believed was exactly what Avram said. He didn't use the word elegant, but I think it's an extremely elegant poster. Um, and decided, let's use that franchise. So we didn't use the pink triangle because it was about Reagan's silence about AIDS, but we used the same typeface. We appropriated AIDSgate from the Nixon Watergate trials, the Watergate Hotel, where Nixon's team broke in and to the Democratic offices or rooms. And anyway, that's history that I'm sure maybe all know, or maybe not. And now Gate is attached to everything today because of Watergate. And so using AIDSgate, using our typeface, using our palette, and using the image of Ronald Reagan, it just was a natural. It just came. Again, we were given total carte blanche. They didn't ask us to work on a particular theme. They just said, we want to sponsor you as a group to make another poster. And I think it's quite successful. I think it's rougher in its appearance. That's deliberate. It's not quite as slick, but when sitting next or being put next to Silence Equals Death, they work so well in tandem. It makes for really powerful imagery. Joni, I was mentioning to you earlier that I was looking for a photograph for your class of a demonstration held in Central Park, where a group of ACT UP members had made a like 25-foot long snake on sticks, where it changed back and forth on both sides, from Silence Equals Death to AIDSgate, Silence Equals Death, and sort of almost like something you'd see in in Chinatown, during New Year's. And that thing traveled everywhere. Some people managed to bring it to, I think they brought it to DC, and it worked so well. But the thing that most people don't know is that there was a third poster. And it's not as known because it was very time sensitive. It's time specific. It was about getting people to vote in the 1988 elections, and we did it also for ACT UP, and this time it was closer to Silence Equals Death, with the exception of that instead of having the black background, we had an American flag, which hung down, with the blue on the right and the stripes on the left. And it had a huge vote in that same typeface. And then in smaller letters, it said Silence Equals Death. And there were, lines at the bottom that one could read if you got close up.
Mhm.
I forgot to mention something, I think it's kind of important. Our original poster, was also time sensitive. And when the Reagan administration ended, the lines really were irrelevant. Not irrelevant, but they just weren't time sensitive anymore. So the reprints in the beginning did have it, that when Act Up went ahead and did their own. And then eventually this copyright showed up, and then eventually the line completely disappeared.
Can I go ahead and read that so people will be able to, because I don't know.
Oh, sure. I wrote it down. I was going to read it for you.
Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
right
I'm
ahead.
going to read it from the poster. So why is Reagan silent about AIDS? What is really going on at the Centers for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Vatican? Gays and lesbians are not expendable. Use your power, vote, boycott, defend yourselves, turn anger, fear, grief into action. And it's really tiny. And so I think that's.
Well, now it's become so timely. That's the funny thing.
Oh, it's totally timely. Yeah. But the text itself, you have to, you're drawn into the poster, and then you are able to see this, I think, this very powerful message. So I love that play on this tiny type that has this, it's just filled with emotion and power in itself. And like you were speaking about earlier, the three posters that you mentioned, they all have that little tiny type at the bottom that gives that powerful message. Can I just ask a question about the Reagan poster, the AIDSgate poster? Because in the version that you sent me, where he's green, he's got this neon green. He had the AIDSgate in the pink on top of that green. And then talk about the eyes, because there was a decision about the eyes, I know.
Yeah. Oliver was, let's say, a self-starter. He took a lot of things into his own hands, and there was tension about that. I actually went to school with Oliver, but hadn't seen him for years until I joined the Silence Equals Death Project. And without consulting the rest of the group, he just went ahead and had the eyes done in pink, well, fuchsia. And the first reaction was negative, because we had done, it was, from the group, and they might not all agree with me, but I think simply because we had done everything together, that this very important graphic decision was just done by one person without a quick discussion. We could have just had it on the phone, or maybe not. Maybe it would have taken us more like a week. But looking, I kind of realized that I liked it, and I think it's safe to say, but I won't say for them, that we all like it. It balances again, now I'm speaking as a designer, it balances the AIDSgate in fuchsia pink beautifully. It draws your eyes up from the words to Reagan's face, which without the evil pink whites of his eyes, I don't think it would have been as successful. So Oliver, who was a great designer, took things into his own hands, and I think it was the right decision.
Well, it really demonizes Reagan. I mean, it turns him into more of a kind of a creature. Yeah, a devil, definitely. So yeah, extremely.
And it's an especially ugly picture of him, with his scrawny neck, and but yeah, that is funny, and again, it's like things happen, and they sometimes are good and sometimes they're bad. Just like my mistaking the position of the triangle,
right.
Yeah,
happy accidents sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I guess I just have one more question, and we touched on it a little bit, but I thought maybe you could expand on this. I've kind of been zooming through history, and so I think maybe to kind of end the conversation, do you think the Silence Equals Death, AIDSgate, and you mentioned Read My Lips posters resonate or could resonate with people considering the current political and social climate. So basically how, I won't put, well, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that because they've survived the test of time, like so many incredible graphics from especially the 20s and every period, there is a collection of specific work that lasted that people go back to and revisit. Um, I think we're very much a part of the canon of political art.
Mm.
The poster is bold, it's provocative, it got a lot of media attention, all of which came as a surprise to us. I mean that truly, truly. I don't think we quite realized what we had fallen onto in this work and how it would live on, that the Leslie Lohman Gallery gave Silence Equals Death all of their windows for a solid year was amazing. I don't know if
That
you
was
see
that was in 2017. So
Yeah, yeah. And I will send you pictures of that as well. And I mean, it's Avram and Charles actually volunteered to sort of update the look of it, keeping the spirit, but giving it a more modern approach. Nothing stays the same in fashion or graphic or art. And it was enormously successful. There, we were very honored, really, really honored that the Leslie Lohman Gallery, which you can tell more to your class about, had decided to do this and to let it go up for 12 months. You could see nothing but that. You couldn't see through the windows to see what was being exhibited in the various shows.
I would be interested to hear about the reception from from the time that was there, because for some people it was nostalgia, right? For
Mhm.
people that were around during that time, and for others it was something that was totally new. So
Yeah.
to hear what people who weren't familiar with the whole journey, I think it
Mhm.
would be really interesting to get their feedback and their opinions and their whole view on this, because you know people of our generation, right? We are becoming part of history, right? And
Yeah.
so
We're
that's what this
old.
is. Yeah, we're old, and so being part of history. But I mean, in your case, and with the group, the Silence Equals Death Project, is just so important, and I think so timely. And even with the internet and all this social media and so on, these kinds of graphic images are just so powerful, and they stick with people. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I think that as far as the canon of art history, I don't think Abram would like that, because he's at least the feeling I get from his book is
Well,
that
activist art history.
activist art,
I
maybe that's
left that
better.
word out.
Yeah, not art history, because that's too stodgy and too contrived. But I think, yeah, I mean, this is for me, having I'm a little younger than you, but I still remember the power that these images had, and I'm really excited for my students and faculty and others too, to to be reintroduced or introduced to this through you and through this conversation that we've had. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I want to add that you said the reception. Something that we have learned, not just because of Leslie Lohman's reception, literal reception and opening, and it got a lot of press. It was heavily covered by, I think, the very last or the second to the last Village Voice. That there were lots and lots of younger people there, young adults, teenagers, um, uh, gay, lesbian, bi, straight, the works. And how many people didn't know the poster, how many younger people didn't know it. And I guess it might be because, I mean, I thought a lot about this, that it's been seen and used in so many demonstrations that it's, now this is just me speaking, not my brothers in crime here, that it's almost becoming a little antique, you know, and antique in the sense that it represents a very specific period, a very specific fight, of which many of the battles were won. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that ACT UP has a lot to do with the advancement of AIDS drugs, as I mentioned earlier, including women. Now today, the largest single group of people with AIDS are Black women. Mm. And when we produced this poster, everyone just thought it was middle-class white guys. I got it, you know, and but it still surprised me. You know, the gallery is very well known. It's been around forever. It's, I think, one of the very first galleries in New York that shows only works by LGBTQ plus people. And, you know, and it was sort of, maybe it was an opportunity for a new generation of people to come and see something that represents, you know, that particular period. AIDSgate is definitely dated, simply because Ronald Reagan is no longer in the White House, happy to say, and long dead. And, you know, but I could see, and Read My Lips, of course, had to do with George Bush, the first. And, but silence equals death can be used, I think, in many ways, and it is, and it doesn't bother us. You know, we were afraid at one point that, you know, when we first discussed copywriting it, you know, with some, you know, horrible right-wing group, you know, connected to, you know, well, white supremacy, for example. You know, it could be applied to any theme if you put something else on top of it. And, but again, we didn't think it was going to live this long, you know, that it was going to be what it has become. And I'm personally very humbled by that, but I really have to say it, I can never say it enough. It was ACT UP. They were the ones that took and ran with it. Mm-hmm. You know.
But it's still, it's a collective, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it was a collective that helped to project this and make it, you know, the symbol that it became. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and ACT UP was a movement where Silence Equals Death was a collective, and ACT UP still exists. There are ACT UP chapters everywhere. Mm-hmm. And the posters in different languages. That's all very gratifying. I've seen it in Asian languages. I don't know if anyone's doing it now, but it within a couple of years, it was really sweeping the world and becoming the iconographic image of AIDS activism.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. I'm humbled by you, you know, agreeing to this. Thank you so much. And it, you know, so good to see you. I'm gonna open it up for people to maybe ask some questions in the chat. And since this is pre-recorded, I will do my best to try to answer some of those, but I hope that I can maybe text you or send you questions if somebody had something that I could then get back to.
Yeah, I mean, I depending on your time and when your classes, and give me some time, you know, some notice, and I'll try to be available. I type very slowly, by the way, but
That's okay. But again, thank you so much. And
thank you. Thank you very much, Johnny.
we'll talk later.
Okay.